Hi, I'm Monica, and you're watching Dog-Eared Musings, and today we're doing what everybody else on BookTube has done this month for the past month, which is the mid-year freak out book tag. Probably a good thing because I've read quite a few books so far this year. I think about 83, not to brag or anything. I mean, yeah, to brag. But we are gonna talk about some of the highlights and the lowlights of my reading year so far and what I'm excited to read coming up next. So the person who created this tag will be included in the show notes below, and I'm not going to tag anyone because I feel like everybody and their mom has done this tag. But if you watch this video and feel inspired to create one of your own, I can leave the questions in the show notes too, so that you can feel free to join if you want to. What was the best book you read so far? One of them was fiction, The Sentence, written by Louise Eldridge. That was a book that I checked out at the library, so I don't have a copy with me, but we'll put the cover close to my head. This was a book that took place in Minneapolis, and it's about a bookstore owner and a ghost that haunts the store. I really loved it, and I talk a bit about it in my first video, which is a book haul, so if you're curious about my feelings of the book, you can watch that video. Another book that I really loved this year was a memoir that was called Speak Okinawa, which I also believe that I talked about in that video as well. It's a memoir about language and mixed identity and kind of the history of Okinawa and its people. What was the best sequel? Well, I don't read a lot of series. I like standalones, but the one series that I've really enjoyed that I know everybody else has enjoyed too was Heartstopper. And honestly, I mean, I know that I'm not alone in saying this, but the second book is, I won't say way better than the first book because the first book was still really good, but the second book is like next level, and I'm really excited to finish the series. And I know that at this point I've read the first two and I could get started on watching the Netflix series, but I'm going to read the next two books and then I'm going to binge the whole series this weekend, hopefully. This is my favorite sequel that I've read so far this year. What's a new release you haven't read yet but want to? I was gonna say Dating Dr. Dill, but I already read it, and as you can see, I'm like more than halfway through. This is a journey. But another thing that I said that I wanted to read was Woman Eating. I forget who the author's name is, but we'll have the cover by my head so you can see who wrote the book. What's the most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I haven't really been keeping track of new releases, but if you know of any new releases that you think that I should be reading, feel free to write a comment and leave a comment below. But some oldies that I haven't read yet that I'm really excited to read this summer, one of them is called Braiding Sweetgrass, and another one is Asada Shakur's autobiography. And I haven't read it yet, and I'm really excited to read this book this month. What was your biggest disappointment? I did a whole video covering why I was disappointed in this book, so I won't go into detail. If you want if you want to know my feelings about it, you can watch that video. My biggest disappointment this year so far, Leanne Moriarty's Apples Never Fall. The pacing of it was off, and there was just so much, like, I was so excited about this book. I loved her other books, Big Little Lies and 9 Perfect Strangers, and this one just fell flat. What was your biggest surprise? So the biggest surprise that I read this year was a graphic novel that was called Stone Fruit. And this is a novel that covers 2 romantic partners who go through a breakup. I was kind of floored by how much this book stuck with me. I wasn't anticipating feeling so immersed in this graphic novel story, and I think that if you're somebody who is going through a breakup, this is kind of the best book, or one of the best books to read to kind of heal through that. Who's your favorite new author? I did a review about this author as well this year, but Anouk Aruj-Paragassam's A Passage North. If you want to read a book written by an author that has such a firm command of language and poetic use of voice, I strongly suggest picking up this book or any other book written by him. Who's your newest fictional crush? I don't have any crushes on any of the characters that I've read. I've been reading a lot of sad people lit this year, and so I think if I had any crushes on any of those characters, it would kind of be a red flag on my mental health. So luckily I don't have any crushes so far this year. Who's your newest favorite character? I've had a couple, Tuki from The Sentence, as well as Zoe and Haley from Other People's Clothes. Those were my 3 favorite characters so far this year. What's a book that made you cry? Speak Okinawa and also All My Rage by Saba Tahir. This book was very, very intense, and I loved the characters. I really rooted for the characters and the story. And luckily, I was able to pick this book up for free at one of my favorite bookstores. They had a table full of ARCs, and I was able to snag this book up. This was definitely also kind of a new favorite for the year. This book is really intense, and if you still haven't read Saba Tahir's book, make sure that you read the trigger warnings before reading this book, because it is beautiful but also very intense. What's a book that made you happy? This might be a weird title, but book There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job was a book that made me happy. I think that the reason why I wrote this down when I was kind of writing notes for this week's video was I think that this book felt like having an inside joke with somebody, where there were so many things that I felt like I could connect with in terms of feeling burnt out and kind of thinking about the job market as someone who is a graduating grad student. What's the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year? I don't really buy a lot of books because I work at a library, but I've bought a couple. One of them that I read this year was Milk, Blood, Heat, and I did a reading review of this book. So if you want to check it out, you can learn more about it in that video. But yeah, look at this cover. It's beautiful. This is one of them, but 2 books that I didn't count towards my reading goal this year, but were also gifts that were given to me that I think count for 2 beautiful books that I received this year were the children's book You Matter, which I think as somebody who is a children's librarian, this is just an amazing book for doing read alouds if you work in education or have a child in your life. This is a really, really good read aloud. And also another book that was given to me that I love is my edition of Little Women, which I've read this book so many times. I didn't read this year, but I'm really excited to do another reread of Little Women and get to use this really cool edition of it. What are some books that you need to read by the end of the year? So I might be doing a book talk with my mom or a book club with my mom. And for that book club, we're going to be reading potentially this book that's called Good Talk by Mira Jacobs. It's a graphic novel that kind of talks about growing up mixed race in America, and it also talks about being Indian in America. And so I'm really excited to read that book. And then I accidentally bought Tomb of Sand, which is the most recent Booker Prize winner. This is a very thick book. I think it's like 777 pages. My goal is to finish it before the beginning of July. We'll see how that goes, but I'm really excited to read this and to kind of hear what all the hype was about with this book. So that was a bit of a wrap up of some of the books, not all of the books that I read this year. I'm really excited for 6 more months of really awesome reads and 6 more months of getting to document my journey with you. If you have any books that you want me to read this year, feel free to write comments below. This has been Dog-Eared Musings. I'm Monica. Happy readings.